Hey everybody, this is Paul. Real quick before we get into the podcast, I just want to let you know that I have launched a new newsletter called Local News Industry Pulse, and it is a briefing of news, policy, trends, and more in the local news industry straight to your inbox every Thursday morning. So if you have a minute, go subscribe to Local News Industry Pulse. You can scroll down in your podcast app and click on the link at the very bottom of the show notes right now, or go to localnewsindustrypulse.beehive.com. That's localnewsindustrypulse.beehive.com/subscribe, and you can sign up there. Let's get into today's episode.
If you have something that is compelling, if you are basically saying that I am a news organization that is trying to address an issue in my local, community, then you kind of have a bit of a story to approach an advertiser with that kind of helps you telling your narrative, but also in making that advertiser become a part of that mission as opposed to simply kind of touting, page view counts, unique visitors, and things like that. I always tell people that the value and the impact is about how, when you're speaking to advertisers, how you're going to help them attain, their objectives and ROI.
This is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Galores. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Richard E. Brown, the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer at Wisconsin Watch. Richard's also a consultant. He helps elevate your revenue strategy for your news organization. And we had a pre-record call, and there was so much value packed in there when I was going through the notes. It was hard to, it was like the opposite of sometimes. It was hard to narrow down some stuff to talk about. So it'll be a fun one. Thanks for coming on the podcast, though. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Of course. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I kind of didn't do you justice there, but if you could just give everybody a quick bio on your life and your career and kind of what brought you to where you are now in the local news biz.
Yeah. Been in it for a while, man. I kind of started, I kind of got a saying. I tell people that I just kind of fell into news media. It really, it's not like you kind of go out and you choose it. My original plan when I was a senior in high school was to go to Florida A&M. They had a pretty good aeronautical engineering program there, and grandmother kind of called out of the blue, and she was like, "Are you sure you want to go to Florida?" And I said, "Well, it seems right." And I didn't have any kind of plan. I just made sense to me, I guess. So I ended up staying. I did a lot of gigs. I was like a pipe fitter. I moonlighted as an insurance broker, and I was a bartender server. And at some point, pretty early on, in my late teens, I started this online greeting card company. I just felt like there was a need in the local area, and it wasn't like I was doing one-to-one individual greeting card, sales. But I noticed there was a need for insurance brokers and dental offices and things like that to kind of send out bulk, physical printed, greeting cards either for the holidays or sometimes just reminders or something like that. So I had a pretty decent design, set up, and I kind of partnered with the local printer. I was able to kind of set up a site and a platform, and the SaaS kind of worked okay, and that's what I did. In the local paper at the time, the Register Star, they did a little kind of mini business bio, and that was kind of my first introduction into it. So I kind of hounded, and they were like, you should come, eventually come be a junior salesperson for us, and I did. I was partnered with the key account seller, and I had a lot of great people and great mentors around me. I struggled, to be honest with you, at first. It was really difficult. And then I kind of found this groove and just being more naturally who I was, and being able to tell narratives and tying, pieces together. And they kind of groove me into the digital silo. I was this young guy. That's kind of the cliche, I guess. And then it just kind of, just took off from there. I just, I was, starting to get requests to, come speak at different places and train, different orgs sometimes. And I just kind of kept saying yes to opportunities. I went from there to Register Star to the Omaha World Herald. did really well there. I loved Omaha. It was awesome. A lot of great mentors, and I've been very fortunate throughout my career. I always tell people like it helps when you got people who are just kind of, they're in your corner that way, and they kind of can just at least break things down for you. And Berkshire Hathaway and On My World Herald was kind of like, they were all accountants. That was kind of when I got my like education on financial management for a news org. And I was on succession plans, and it was groovy, man. It was just cool. Then I don't know. I was kind of a sponge. I just learned everything I could. I just was a doer. I didn't, like to sit around. And from Omaha, I went to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, worked with great people there, great mentors, and just great leadership, and got recruited to go to LPI. Then I went back to USA Today as their head of churn. I went to Daily Beast, overseeing retention. And now I'm with with Wisconsin Watch, and it's kind of full circle, man. It really, you never know where your career is going to take you, but I will tell you that if you are adamant about knowing and understanding who you are, then you can at least make very deliberate decisions. And I've been very fortunate and very lucky, but it was kind of, I don't know, just the universe has kind of been good, and I always want to give it back to the universe. So happy to be talking to you today.
That's awesome. Yeah, your network, what's the saying? Your network is your net worth or whatever. But your network, like the people you surround yourself with, is really important. It took me a long time to get that through my thick head personally and realize that, take that seriously. So what's your role like right now at Wisconsin Watch? Like, what's your day-to-day? What are you helping out with there?
Right now, pretty robust. The whole idea is that everything that is related to growth, I touch, from partnerships to audience to earned revenue, marketing operations, individual membership development. Basically the idea with Wisconsin Watch is that because it's kind of, I always tell people that I'm like, we're in this weird, but also very enticing and intriguing time with news media. And, Wisconsin Watch, we're an investigative, journalism platform. So we kind of have that luxury of being able to do things that, is a little bit more focused, a little bit more siloed. But I think also one of the most intriguing parts of news media that you don't get to explore a whole lot, which is truly holding the power to account and identifying where inequality is, running rampant, or if there are issues within the local economy or state legislature, anything that, is going to affect Wisconsin residents, either on a national level that's bringing it down to a local level or a hyper local level. That's what we cover. And I just kind of gotten enthralled into this idea that I am going to ensure that we're able to bring that impact across a huge, kind of macrocosm of like a network, and just being able to be collaborative and share that content and, bring the content to the rural areas of the underserved communities. We merged with Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service. So it's kind of like I get to work with George Stanley and Ron Smith all over again. And that's been just this really amazing kind of, homecoming feeling for me. And I just want to do right by everybody, in this org, but also want to do right by the, as a resident of Wisconsin, I want to do right by the residents of Wisconsin. So, yeah, man, that's kind of in a nutshell. Sorry, it's a bit ambiguous, but
that's awesome.
Specifics, but yeah,
that's what I'm looking for, because you kind of got your fingers in everything. So it's, that's the whole point of this podcast, kind of shine a light, help local publishers out with their business and everything. And it sounds like you are an expert there. So in our first call, you and I spoke about the importance of publishers finding, you kind of brought this up. I was pitching some other stuff, and you kind of organically brought up the importance of publishers finding advertising partners that align with their mission. And I thought that was really cool the way you talked about it. So I was wondering if you could speak on that just a little bit and how you see that.
Yeah. It's so what's been cool is that I think I've always been in, news media revenue, and I've been able to learn a lot, because in some cases I've been able to fail a lot, and I've also been able to succeed a lot. And in doing so, with local publishers, especially like, startups or pubs that are kind of like started by editorial leaders, and they're just really trying to find their groove as far as how you start to have this conversation with advertisers. It's kind of like you're not going to have, the page views and the audiences right away. And I tell people that's okay, because quite honestly, we're in a weird paradox as far as news media advertising. It's almost like if we're too big, if you're, I was at the Journal Center, we were doing 20 million page views a month or something like that. you're going to get cut down anyway. Advertisers are like, well, I don't want to be on every page. I want to be on like just the sports section. And if you're too small, it's almost kind of like they kind of shy away from it. But I'm like, you shouldn't, because I'm a revenue leader who believes in impact. So I'm like, if you have something that is compelling, if you are basically saying that I am a news organization that is trying to address an issue in my local, community, or my local economy, whatever the case might be, statewide, then you kind of have a bit of a story to approach an advertiser with that kind of helps you in telling your narrative, but also in making that advertiser become a part of that mission, as opposed to simply kind of touting, page view counts, unique visitors, and things like that, which, by the way, they're important to know. But I always tell people that like the value and the impact is about how, when you're speaking to advertisers, how you're going to help them attain, their objectives and ROI. For example, and I just used this today, if you are, let's say, a jeweler or a dressmaker, or, a dress shop, or a bride's dress shop, if I come to you and say I have 100,000 page views of the general economy, of just a general audience in Wisconsin, versus I have 1,000 emails of, women who are engaged, right? They're going to lean into the 1,000 emails because it's more on par with who they inevitably believe it's going to yield them an ROI. So I'm always kind of like coaching, news orders. I'm like, dude, don't shy away from this idea that you're not big enough to attract an advertiser. What you should lean into is like, who's going to benefit the most in helping me kind of achieve this trifecta of serving, meaning, you serve the org, you serve the audience, and the advertiser is serving as well, because not only are they being on your platform to yield more opportunity for themselves, but also they're a resource for that local community as well. So, they're part of the community just like anybody else. And I feel like sometimes, there's such a weird kind of stigma that kind of goes around like advertisement and what it actually does for a local economy or a local community, but also vice versa, like how it's perceived. And I'm like, when you align on that mission, it feels so much better. Like, okay, yeah, you're an advertiser who makes sense because they're covering, energy savings, so you're a solar panel company. That makes sense. I'm an audience that's going to read about this because I'm interested in it. But also you're an advertiser who I may want to explore a little bit because maybe I'm interested in residential solar panels. So I'm just, being more holistic and mission driven and aligned to that mission is kind of important.
Yeah. I would also think, say it's a smaller audience, and if you went on Facebook or Meta or whatever, but it's an organization like Wisconsin Watch and you're a reader, you already have that integrity or trust with your organization, and you're going to make that subconscious connection with like a brand that's advertising, like, oh, I trust them, they trust that, you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing.
That's definitely a big part of it. One of the things that I realized too is that a lot of, smaller orgs in particular, but big ones too, we're not always great at like telling our own story as to why we're important, what we represent to the greater democratic republic, what would happen if we don't exist. The idea of fighting misinformation is not intrinsically tied to politics. I'm like, politics is one vein and news is not politics. Politics is not news. However, they do rely on each other. I'm not, naive about that. But misinformation involves fraud, student loans, physical and mental abuse, elderly care, Social Security.
I was just gonna say my list thing is like the food system and some of the nasty stuff in our food and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you don't, what I tell people is I'm like, when you don't have that, when we don't have this kind of outlet that's dedicated to bringing you just journalism at its heart, right? To just bring you the objective. Here's what it is. Here's the, it's not a whole lot of editorialism or commentary on it. It's just, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know. And we become a resource. But when you don't have that, it becomes, a lot more grounding and scary, right? The theatrics of politics, I know, are it's easy, but there's so much more things that we cover and that we care about. So being able to tell that story in a way that starts to build a relationship with audiences is really important, because it establishes not only your brand as the kind of go-to content outlet that I can feel like I can trust, because I know that you guys are nonpartisan, or I know that you guys are committed to doing this for my state or my city. it helps for advertisers, it helps for, the community and the audience that you're serving, but it also kind of helps just to bring some alleviation to, sometimes I feel like traumatic experiences. We've had multiple, like, just so much gun violence in this country, right? I'm like, people go to your local news outlets to bring resolve. Like it's one thing to report on the moment. Here's what we know, here's what happened, here's the issue. But great journalism outlets are good at continuing on with, here's kind of what's going on now, here's the latest on it, person's been apprehended, here's what you need to know, and then here's how you can avoid it, or here's some things that we can do as far as the community, here's what's going to be available as far as, services. It just, to me, I'm always kind of like, news has always felt as though it's a relationship with the viewer or the reader, in a way that you're kind of committed to each other, in that, like, not everything is going to be all gravy, but I am committed to your well-being. And that is, what I think we should just tout and just continue it and just say it constantly all the time. And sometimes it just gets missed by the wayside, but it's important. So,
yeah.
Sorry if I did I answer your question?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And like, I think an example of kind of what you're saying at the end there is, the hurricane that's just been going on. It's done major damage. And, I'm in Western Colorado. It didn't affect me directly, but it's already fading from the national headlines, But there's still major damages in those communities in Carolinas and Georgia and everything like that. So, I just had a guy from Atlanta on this morning on the podcast who will be coming out. And, it's up to them to keep kind of reporting and keep that relationship with the reader or the viewer or whatever it is built up.
Well, it's our responsibility to bring that information to you so that you can be an advocate in any way that you want to. Think about how many movements and motions and causes and developments have been, just set into motion because there was reporting done on it. There's something that's brought to light. There's some mishandling or some misdoing or wrongdoing, and we report on it. We continue to report on it, and then, lo and behold, new developments start to happen. There's new trauma centers. There's a better relationship with, police officers and the homeless, because police officers basically have now started to understand that, sometimes that, people are going through, mental issues that are just hard, man, to we had an issue like that in Milwaukee. Not everybody's a threat, but there is a need for understanding of what people go through to make a better society, more vibrant, more relationship based. And, I think that we as news organizations and outlets kind of owe it to people to make sure that we're doing that all the time, and just not educating for the sake of vanity, but educating for the sake of, like, look, an informed general public on whatever it is always going to be the foundation of how we evolve is people. So I believe that to my soul, my core. So
that's great. It's great stuff. You spoke a minute ago about storytelling, and we spoke about this before also. And we talked about the importance of storytelling in marketing for local news publishers, which I don't know that everybody in the field always thinks about. Sometimes there's a bit of, just the facts type. Like, what is that show, Dragnet, that old show? Just the facts, ma'am. What, in your opinion, what are local publishers in particular doing wrong here with storytelling, or what could they stand to improve?
I don't want to say that everybody's doing wrong. I don't coach that. I always try and understand, but I think
right. That makes sense.
I've learned, I guess, is everybody has a story and a narrative that is it's just tasty, man. I love diving into everybody's kind of, where they came from, how they got here. And one of the things that's kind of, segued into is it's really the foundation of how you start to have conversations with advertisers, sponsors, and with fundraisers, with donors. It really kind of sets the tone as to not only what your mission is, but what drives that mission. Kind of like if you're asking somebody why like 6 times, it really kind of gets into the heart of it. And one of the things that I always like to do is set that up, because not only does it help, especially somebody who's an editorial leader, as to identifying who they are in this capacity, or, what they represent, but it kind of almost evokes the emotion and the passion, because that really translates well when you're talking to donors and when you're talking to advertisers. And if you're covering content that is just, either not being covered, by anybody else, or that is particularly important to sustainability of a community, you will be shocked at how many opportunities and how many people want to either invest or partner with you in some way, shape, or form to kind of continue on your fight. So I always tell people that I take people through the hero's journey, right? I'm like, look, if you are covering education, education in a city or in an area, whatever, it's important to highlight that in your conversations, because you then allow and invite somebody else to become a hero in that journey with you. So if you're saying, hey, in our state, what we're noticing is that I always tell people that it's kind of an art. You kind of like state what the issue is, what that issue will lead to if it's not addressed, the potential solution, and how that person kind of like become a part of that, the hero in that solution, and the objectives and the ROI and how you're going to go about it. So if you're talking about education, you might find something like, hey, we're covering this because we're starting to notice that there is a lack of high school students that are, going to college. And what that is leading to is that now we have a surplus in the job market because we don't have enough college students or, kids who are, qualified to be able to kind of like perform these tasks at these jobs. And we're uncovering why. So we've done some reporting. We have the data to kind of substantiate it. And what we're finding out is that, these kids are extremely smart. Some of them are actually brilliant. The problem is that in that high school journey or that tenure, the parents don't necessarily know how to navigate the collegiate like programs, and the resources that are available to them is so robust, so abundant. So if you're talking to a local university as being a particular partner or an advertiser, you're like, hey, we think that you guys could be the go-to resource guy for the parents who are struggling with this. It's going to help our community. And oh, by the way, I know that if you only get 1 or 2 students to enroll into your program, your ROI is going to be met based on what I'm asking you to spend, because, average tuition may be $20,000, $30,000. So the idea is to say, I don't want you just to advertise with us that you exist and that, people should apply. I want you to advertise that we're going to be your guide in navigating your college career in high school. That's different, right? So I don't know. I'm not degreed in behavioral economics or the psychology of consumerism, but I'm studied in it pretty well, because you're gonna have to be when you're in the field of audience development. And but everybody needs a story. Everybody needs. It's easy to put yourself in a situation, or to put yourself in the seat of a character in a story, in a narrative. And when you understand that, it kind of helps you become emotionally tied to what it is that the other person is trying to convey to you. And it's important to kind of ground you in the importance. And when we kind of talk to that, either if you're talking to an advertiser or to a funder, it just kind of starts to change the game a little bit. And, everybody's been doing it for years. It's just that I try and be a little bit more pragmatic about it. And sometimes I even over-logistify it, if that's a word, but that's really what it's about to me.
Today's episode is sponsored by localpod.co. LocalPod offers podcast production and consulting for local news organizations, and only local news organizations. LocalPod creates weekly news podcasts based off of the top stories from your publication. You provide the script, we handle the rest. We narrate your news, edit it, produce it with a custom intro and outro with music, and distribute the podcast to all available podcast apps. Your listeners will see your branding and hear your content in their podcast feed, just like wherever you're listening to right now. Podcasts are one of the most engaging digital formats, which is why we can also help you monetize your podcast as well. We offer custom ad reads for your podcast, and we can also set up subscriptions so that you can monetize your audience directly. Have you thought of launching a podcast but want to control it in-house? We can help you with that too. LocalPod offers podcast coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one coaching calls, along with the actionable steps you need to launch a successful revenue-generating podcast of your own. To find out more, visit localpod.co, that's localpod.co, or just click on the link in the episode show notes in your podcast app. All right, back to the show. That's great. Yeah, that's an amazing example with the college, approaching the college to advertise with you like that. Because not only is it a great pitch, like practically, it's also like you can be the hero. You can be the one that helped and it's kind of like you said, behavioral economics. It's like helps the ego out a bit, whoever's making that decision. And it's still a win-win, but it just like does help nudge along and just approaching things from that framework. And could you expand on I'm kind of familiar with the heroes framework. It's like a George Lucas thing, isn't it? Or he used it in the original Star Wars. It's like
there's so many different.
The way I've heard it explained before, it's like you're not Luke Skywalker. You're Yoda. Yeah.
There's so many iterations of like your traditional like hero's journey. It could be as simple as in cinema anyway. Like there's a hero. You kind of have status quo. Something affects status quo, causing hero to would-be hero to shift, move, change, adjust, journey to within that journey to hero is then changed, adjusted, evolved, whatever case might be, because of said challenge or objective that's ahead. And then inevitably you kind of get to a, act 3 or, kind of like the arc. And then by the end of that arc, the hero is then transformed into something else, right? So there's different iterations of it, but the way I kind of like to pair it, I guess, in our conversations is really just about, it's kind of odd because like we do it all the time, but especially when you're like doing narratives and articles for content, right? Even when you're like, well, I was just talking to our editorial team about this preeclampsia. Preeclampsia has been actually not becoming a very big problem. I just had a child and I know about this pretty intimately because my wife just went through and had an issue with preeclampsia. And it was scary. It was like, she's never had high blood pressure. We have three children. It's the first time we've kind of had to deal with that. And I cannot understand how important nurses are, man, to our society. Just like salute to them all day because they were so helpful and so engaging and so informative about like, okay, here's what to expect, the effects of magnesium. And one of the things they kept saying to me was like, I really wish there was more education around this because people don't understand that like basically we're having a lot more of an influx of women who are having children later in life. And you can't really like deliver a child if your blood pressure's there, right? So they have to stay an extra night, which is causing backlogs and things like that. And when they have to stay in, rooms longer and stuff like that. But it's scary. And it leads to, higher infant death rates and, but disproportionately, they all said the same thing. One of the demographics that it affects the most is Black women. And they were all like, we just wish somebody would tell the story. So quite honestly, just to tell the idea of preeclampsia is one thing in articles and content. To be able to say, here's what nurses need you to know for preeclampsia, something totally different, right? It kind of like gives you this spirit of the hero's journey of what these men and women are trying to do as far as with this story and with this information that just educates the general public. And I was mostly, it was as women that I was talking to. So I kind of have them in my head, but obviously they're men and women nurses. So salute to all of them, man. They were really just phenomenal. But yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure I kind of like address that, but we have the power to do that, so.
Yeah, man, I feel you. My boys I have twin toddlers. They'll be 3 in November. And they were born super preemie, like 10 weeks early. And we're in the NICU for months. They're both fine now. They're both great. They're wild. Hopefully they're sleeping right now. But so we were in there. We were basically living out of there in the NICU for 3 months. And nurses, they're great. They make that place go round. I'll tell you that much. Yeah, so I just want to touch on that too. Yes, thank you for expanding on the hero's journey and all that stuff too. That's exactly what I was hoping to get. Can you tell us? So I thought this was really interesting. I think this is a you thing. I think it's a Richard thing when we talked about it the first time. Can you tell us about your 70-20-10 decision model that you kind of explained to me?
So that actually was something that I kind of, put my own flavor on too. It's actually a learning. I forgot the authors now. Forgive me, but it's a way in which humans. It's based in kind of behavioral psychology and how we learn and interpret and digest information. Particularly for on the job, how we learn new skills, on a job. And basically it's kind of this breakdown of like, most of the skills that you like learn for longevity and on a job are basically from experience. You'll learn some from like technical manuals. You'll learn some from people actually, teaching you and talking to you about stuff, classroom setting. But for the majority, most of it is learned through the experience. So what I did was kind of started thinking about, well, if you can learn that information or if you can communicate information in a way that makes people feel as though they understand the heart of what's going on, then in essence, you can actually, it's a bit of a scenic route, and I won't go through it all, but in essence, you can actually kind of mold perception based on these kind of same theoretical principles. Well, what the learning, the teachings weren't theoretical, but this is my theoretical take on this was the idea that we make decisions. 70% of our decision making is made emotionally, 20% is made rationally, and 10% is justifiable. So, for perspective, 70% of our decision making is, well, we buy a house, right? So we like the way it looks, great neighborhood. It's got the tire swing in the front. The light hits it just right in the sunset. It it feels homey. It feels like this is the place. I can see our, like it just it does all those things that you're like, okay, so that's 70% of our decision making right there. It's just everything that kind of comes with the senses and the heart, of like, okay, this is this is the right thing. Then 20% is rational. So 20% is basically saying, can we afford it? What are the taxes? Is it in a great school district? How close is it as far as vicinity to my job or the school? Things like that. And then 10% is justifiable. It's testimonials, reviews, right? We kind of like need that scapegoat a little bit to say, this is a good decision. So we'll say things, such and such, the reviews say that the school district here is great. The reviews say this is a safe environment, stuff like that. So with that said, I kind of, in the vein of the hero's journey, I kind of take people through that same type of segue sentiment where I'm like, if I'm talking to you, Paul, let's say, Paul, do you have any like causes or anything like that you donate to or like that you're an advocate for? Pet shelters?
Well, actually, what we were just talking about with the when my boys were born, we live in a smaller town, and the boys were at the Children's Hospital in Denver, which is 300 miles away. So we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House for all that time, which is a completely charitable organization for parents of mostly sick kids, but anybody that needs help. My kids weren't thankfully that sick or anything, but we like to donate, like something we saw when we were in there. Former guests will donate like a dinner or something like that to everybody staying there or something like that. We like doing that because it meant a lot when people would bring in, like, get food for us at the end of the day from being in the NICU all day. So,
well, actually, then that's perfect. I can take you through this right now. So,
all right, yeah,
I can say, Paul, how you doing? My name is Richard Brown. I'm the local director of development here at the local Ronald McDonald House. And this year, because these nurses have done such a phenomenal job of making sure that the parents of all the children that have kind of been through so much, just trauma in some cases, man, and just kind of like exhaustion of like dealing with everything and just, knowing that these nurses are there to make sure that you guys are okay and kind of like well catered to and just informed. This year, we're going to put on one of the most mega events for them. It's totally family oriented. You can bring your kids if you want to, but it's just a way to kind of give back to the people who have been doing so many great things as far as like facilitating an environment where you as a parent just feel great about the situation you're about to go into. Right now, we have a goal that we're trying to get to about raising $40,000 for this particular event that we want to put on. And by the way, the local bank here in town has said that they're actually going to match us dollar for dollar of whatever we raise. And Paul, I know that, you've kind of experienced it yourself, and I know that you kind of, but would you be willing this year to donate $50 to our cause, man? It's really going to be fun. You and your family have free tickets right away. It's going to push us over the threshold as far as every dollar that we can get. But man, this is a great cause. And I just want you to know that this is coming from a place of wanting to celebrate those who've given so much to other people. Would you be willing to donate?
$50. I got here. I never have this, but here we go. There we go. Right. Coming right at you.
I would have took 25.
I never have cash, but I had to show it off.
I really hope there are programs that exist like that, man. But I don't care if it's for veterans. I don't care. The ability to tie in the realness, the rawness of the emotion, which makes us human, right? Just that interaction of being like real. That is what I'm telling people. And news media kind of has this unique perspective of being able to touch on so many facets of that. I know like there are guys coming back, men and women coming back from deployment, man. Like they need to reassimilate back to civilian lifestyle. They need to understand resumes and how a lot of the work that they were doing, like think about just every facet of life. And I tell people that I'm like, if you can tap into the rawness of your own emotional appeal and why it's going to be important for other people, you in theory could leverage this in any way possible. And how great would it be to leverage it for good, man, creating a community of vibrancy. Speaking to donors and saying, I'm going to do this because I believe it's a good thing for what we're, looking for in as far as our community. And I need your help. So that's what I mean. Like if you can get to being very systematic, and I just kind of like, chop up 70-20-10. It's just something that you can keep in your head that's easy to refer to in case you miss something. The one thing I didn't say, Paul, is that I was going to say, oh, and by the way, Phil, or Jacob, or Mary, they've also donated to this cause, right?
Right.
In a particular case, I didn't have a good example, but that's the 10% that I didn't even have to get to. For the most part, sometimes you can just get there with the 70%, but I tell people, make sure you got the 20 and 10% in there too.
Yeah.
So that's how it lays out. Yeah.
It's a great framework for everything, for like your life, dealing with people, deal with everything, or publishers, dealing with advertisers, donors, any relationship, or yourself, like just seeing that in yourself. You know what I mean?
And
I'm going to look at that now. Yeah.
It's such a great framework for outbound communication, emails, how we're doing, requests, how we're doing communication in general. Like, I mean, it's such I like it because it's simple. I manage, larger sales teams. So I always kind of like try and do things where it's like, if you're looking at the macro of a large volume of people, keeping it simple and very concise is better. Dealing with somebody one-on-one, this is easy to kind of like be more elaborative on, but yeah, that's what it is.
That's great. I love it. I've never heard of that before. I love the way you look at stuff and the way you bring this to the field that you're into. It's awesome, man. We've touched just about everything, and I'm going to be mindful of your time because I think our time is just about up. Is there anything else I missed outside of the questions we didn't touch on that you'd really like to get across to any local publishers out there? You don't have to say anything, but if anything screaming importance pops up in your mind that you'd like to get out there, please let me know.
For publishers, churn and retention are different. Yeah, make sure you're mindful of both. And I always tell people that when I kind of got into retention, it was at LPI, and I started to learn the law of exponential growth through retention. LPI kind of had this really cool and unique way of looking at retention as kind of a multi-year phase, right? And it was kind of cool because I was working on advertisers, like 60, 70,000 advertisers all at once. So you kind of get to see it as kind of like a swarm, basically. But when I brought this to news media, I realized that we were looking at things almost, in my opinion, like backwards. Like, so for example, if we get 100 new subs or 100 new members and we lost 25 of them, we say, well, we churned 25%. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm not looking at it just in front of my nose. Like we actually retained 75% because now we're going to go into next year. We're going to get another 100, right? And then we're going to retain 75% of 175, which is 150 in year 3. We're going to retain 75. So if you can keep that momentum, usually somewhere between 50 and 75% as far as retention, that's really good. Churn is what you're losing, net churn, net loss as far as make sure you understand those metrics. Sometimes some news orgs are just trying to get to a net zero, but you want to be in a position where you're gaining more than you're losing every week, just as a metric. So that's important. And also too, I always tell people that in subscriber journeys or membership journeys, I cut it up usually into 5 phases, depending on if you're for profit or nonprofit. But I always tell people there's kind of after acquisition, there's an onboarding communication phase you need to do. There's a re-engagement communication phase you need to do. Onboarding is basic, like, welcome, thanks so much. Here's kind of like some navigation for you, things like that, just to make that person feel ingratiated, especially in their first 7 days. Re-engagement is about kind of getting them to engage more with newsletters or your app, upcoming events, things like that, just kind of keeping them engaged with the content. And then you're going to get into inevitably what I call the churn phase. which is you have to start a renewal phase. You have to kind of start communicating that you're up for renewal about 30 days out. So you want to have really stellar communication during that time frame. If you're a for-profit, you may have something called grace, where payment failure occurs, is triggered because a credit card declines or something like that, which that's really easy things to adjust, that actually, if you really pay attention to it, can get you some significant, financial positives pretty quickly. But you want to have something for grace, is what I call people, like, because a lot of people are still active and then went back. So if somebody officially is done with either being a member, and it's a little different with nonprofits, obviously, but for profits, you want to have kind of like a win back communication cadence as well. So sometimes it's lower offers, sometimes it's, annual, discount, stuff like that.
That's solid gold. Thank you. I never, my business doesn't quite work like that, but I'm not a publisher myself. But, I'm familiar with churn and retention and stuff. And it's just like it seems so simple. I never really thought about it deeply enough before, but you're totally right. Retention is different than churn. You know what I mean? You just think like, oh, I got this. It's like how they say it hurts a lot more to lose $1 than it feels good to gain $1. It's like that kind of psychology there is almost how kind of
cheaper to keep them than it is to
try. Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Awesome.
For sure. And I mean, it is kind of like spinning plates, man, because you got to focus on acquiring new, or while basically, entertaining your current, while also focusing on people who have just left. So, you kind of have to have a bit of a focus on each one of them and a cadence for each one. Sometimes you'd be shocked. Like, I mean, people have like left as far as being a member or a subscriber a year ago or something like that. They're willing to come back. Sometimes it's very simple stuff. Sometimes they either forgot, or sometimes they're just like, I'd be willing to come back to you if if you guys did this, or if I got a lower rate. A lot of times people were just like, I couldn't afford it at the time. So, or a lot of people are like, hey, life circumstances change all the time. So just make sure that you kind of have a bit of a focus on all of them.
Do you have any thoughts on when you said, when renewal comes up, and making sure people are aware of that? I've just noticed this as a consumer of products before. Have you seen anything with the actual messaging there? Like, I've gotten them before where it's just like very cold and direct to the point, like it'll renew on this date. And then I've had people just like literally different copy, like just letting me know, more like personable or something like that. And it changes my whole mood. I'm like, oh yeah, of course I'll renew. I'm curious if that's something you've seen or not. I just thought of it in the moment.
I lean more towards personable and warm, just because it reflects my personality a little bit more. If you want to be more stoic and stuff like that, and like grace periods and stuff like that, that's fine too. But I've always found that, I get more, I catch more opportunities with honey, and I don't mean that to be, tongue in cheek or anything like that. It's just that I don't know everybody's situation, right? You just don't. So why would I go out of my way to kind of like make your day worse, So you're right. If I can say, hey man, look, here's what you're gonna, FOMO is kind of like you sometimes. I'll like, look, remember this, and there are great examples too, like so many different orgs, and not even just in news media, Spotify, everybody's got great kind of like, you're almost up types of communication cadences, where it's like, hey, Paul, if you don't subscribe to Wisconsin Watch, remember we got the voters guide, we have the fact briefs, this kind of, especially going into this election season, you might want to kind of make sure that you kind of, get squared away into renewal. We know you've been a long advocate of what we're doing. So just stuff like that. I guess to answer your question, I'm a little bit more of the latter versus, I think sometimes, which can come across a bit cold, but whatever is on par for your brand identity, I guess.
Yeah, that was on the spur question. I didn't really.
No, it's fine.
All right, Richard, we've run over a little bit. Please tell the audience where they can find you, connect with you, anything about Wisconsin Watch, anything you'd like to promote and put out there.
Yeah, you can obviously make sure that you visit wisconsinwatch.org. You can always catch me at richardebrown.co or on all of my social channels, Richard E. Brown 17, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, anything like that. And just be on the lookout, man. Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service. If you haven't kind of like checked that out, please do subscribe to us, both Wisconsin Watch and Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service. We're doing a lot of great things right here in the state of Wisconsin and the city of Milwaukee and surrounding areas. So be on the lookout for us, man, because we're coming and we got so much energy. We're very happy with, our progression, and we are honestly trying to do what's right for the sake of, the betterment of Wisconsin residents. So, and I'm just here to change the world, Paul. I'll try to
That's all. That's all.
help out any news org I can, man. So, I believe in what we do as an industry, and I'm a big ambassador for everything across this country, and also too for other countries as well. So, this industry has so much life left, man. So don't ever take it for granted.
That's awesome. I love it. I love your takes and everything. I love your attitude. So thanks for coming on. We might have to do this again, because I thought of a lot more stuff we could talk about, but we just ran out of time.
Hey, man, whenever you need. It was great talking with you, Paul.
Cool. All right, thanks. Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.